I really do think The War of the Worlds was the film that gave birth to the modern science fiction era.
The film was just, it was a colossal success.
AFI had 100 films in 100 years, the best films. And War of the Worlds was number 28.
When people think back in my career, that is what they talk about. They talk about War of the Worlds.
Paramount was a big studio in those days and one of the leaders in Hollywood.
In those days, it was more a studio-run community.
Paramount's own word, that was a family. The beautiful part about it from a designer standpoint is nothing was outsourced. They were a complete entity with the camera department, the art department, the effects department. We're all under the one roof.
Paramount had the Golden Circle. As I said, it started in 1922. These were the stars of tomorrow. You had to be there every day and punch a card. I had a time card, so they would know that I had come in. After all, they're paying me $125 a week, so they want to make sure I show up. And you would read scenes with boys and girls who had interviews there. You would help them out with their reading, so that's what you did pretty much every day.
When I started my first day of employment at Paramount, I was making set models, and I built this catapult out of balsa wood and rubber bands and paper clips and made it so it would work. It would shoot these peas across the room. When I carried the model over to DeMille's office, the catapult was included, you see. That was my first meeting with Mr. DeMille. And when he saw it, this intrigued him, and he tried it a few times, and it really worked. He spent about an hour of his valuable time playing with this doggone thing.
Jesse Lasky, who was a big executive at Paramount, he bought this book from H.G. Wells in 1924, and it sat at Paramount until 1951.
H.G. Wells' son, Frank, was interested in doing the movie, doing the book. And he said, sorry, son, but it's been sold. I don't own it anymore. And then there was a German director, a Russian director. Even Hitchcock was interested. I believe that H.G. Wells said, I'm sorry, I think you've waited too long. I not only do not own it, but you've waited too long. You cannot do a period picture now. It wouldn't be of any interest, and there's no way to bring it up to date. Well, comes 1938. Who brings it up to date but Orson Welles?
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the most terrifying thing I've ever witnessed. Wait a minute. Someone calling someone or something. Ladies and gentlemen, it's indescribable. I can hardly force myself to keep looking at it. It's so awful. The eyes are black and they gleam like a serpent. The mouth is kind of V-shaped with saliva dripping from its rimless lips that seem to quiver and pulsate. And the monster or whatever it is can hardly move. Most extraordinary experience, ladies and gentlemen. I can't find words. Well, I'll pull this microphone with me as I talk. I'll have to stop the description until I can take a new position. Hold on, will you please? I'll be right back in a minute.
I was probably maybe 4 years old, but I knew what stuff was going on. I could kind of tell what was happening. I listened to it with my grandfather. My folks were out that night because it was around Halloween or something. And I remember it terrified me because my grandfather got scared. He was believing it, as a lot of people did, And I remember feeling that fear. Oh, my God, if my grandfather's afraid, and he's the hero guy here, he's the grown-up, what's going to happen to me, And I think I had dreams about that for a while. And a lot of people didn't stick with it at the end. That's why it caused such a panic. A lot of people were already out of their cars or going somewhere, doing something, getting out of the place. Because at the end, Wells does this whole monologue.
This is Orson Welles, ladies and gentlemen, out of character, to assure you that the War of the Worlds has no further significance than as the holiday offering it was intended to be. The Mercury Theater's own radio version of dressing up in a sheet and jumping out of a bush and saying boo. It's Halloween.
Ray Harryhausen wanted to do War of the Worlds, but Cecil B. DeMille said, I'm sorry, I own it and I'm giving it to George Pal. He was very disappointed, but he said, George is my very good friend, and if anyone can pull this off, it'll be George Pal.
I actually built a Martian based on H.G. Wells' description in War of the Worlds. I wanted to keep it in the Victorian period, which the original story was laid. He described the creature that came from the spaceship as sort of an octopus-like type of creature. I took it all around Hollywood. Jesse Lasky had it for a while, and George Pal had it for a while. I understood that Paramount owned the rights to all Wells' subjects. So I thought Jesse Lasky could really get in because he practically founded Paramount Pictures. But he had it for 6 months, but we couldn't raise money. People weren't that interested in science fiction at that time.
I knew George Pal growing up through the 30s, through his Puppetoons. He was my absolute favorite. I knew all of his Puppetoons. George Pal was in Budapest before the war began. And I remember these Puppetoons goose-stepping Heil Hitler through Holland, knocking down fences, tulips, windmills. And I think he had to soon get out of Europe after that was released.
And it's about an invasion of Holland, a very stylized invasion, by these mechanical monsters called the Screwballs, who are obviously the Nazis. And in the very end, Jan, a little Dutch boy, is praying in a ruined church for some sort of deliverance, and then all of a sudden it starts to rain, and the Screwballs rust and turn to dust, and they're beaten, and Holland is free again. And oddly enough, it's almost identical to the ending of War of the Worlds in a lot of ways.
His Puppetoons were very elegant. I worked on the first 12. I had read in the paper that he had just come over from England, so I was one of the first animators he hired.
Several of George's dearest friends were animators, and probably none closer than Walter Lantz, the man behind Woody Woodpecker and dozens of cartoon characters. In almost every one of George Pal's films, he'd throw in Woody Woodpecker somewhere as a kind of tribute to Walter Lantz. It all started with Destination Moon, where there's a film very simply breaking down the process of space travel as told by Woody Woodpecker. I believe that the Woody in War of the Worlds is in opening scenes of the meteor flashing through the night sky over the treetops.
I think George Pal caught on to something in the early 50s Hollywood. He knew that rocketry was a happening thing. There was talk about UFOs. It was the atomic age. And he had always had an interest in fantasy, and fairies and gnomes and creatures in the woods could now be transposed into a new genre. He made good films about these popular subjects. And for a while there, he was kind of what George Lucas and Steven Spielberg are and James Cameron are to this more later generations.
George Pal went to the head of Paramount Studio, Don Hartman, and presented him with the script that Barry Lyndon had written for him. Don Hartman, not caring a hoot about science fiction, said, oh, this is where this belongs, and threw it in the wastepaper basket. Well, poor Mr. Pal, I mean, he came unglued. He absolutely lost his mind. He leaped across the desk, and he grabbed him by the lapels. He was going to strangle the man. Frank Freeman Sr., who was president of Paramount Studio, he came in and stopped them because they'd never seen Mr. Pal react like that. So when he came in and said, don't worry about a thing, George, the movie is yours, whatever budget you need, whatever you need, you just come to me.
We shall be the first men on Earth to get a real look at these invaders from space.
was surprised when I got a call from my agent saying, go to Paramount for a wardrobe fitting. And I said, for what? And they said, it's called War of the Worlds. So I went to the appointment, and the group of us who played the scientists were there being fitted at the same time. And while we were talking, a little man came circling around the group of us, and he tapped me on the back and said, I must talk to you. I must speak to you. And I said, yes, I said, as soon as we finish here, I'll... And he says, I'm at the Writers' Building, room 111, or whatever it was. And we finally did finish the wardrobe thing. I was about to leave the lot, and I thought, oh, somebody wanted to see me. And I went to the Writers' Building and to the office that he had named, and it was George Powell. He was really distressed. He said, you are blonde. And I said, well, no, this is the color of my hair. And he said, you are blonde. I have pictures. And he brought a picture out of the drawer of his desk, and it was one of the file pictures at RKO with me with the blonde hair. I hated those pictures. I don't think anybody else ever gave me a job out of them, but George Powell did.
We'll take all our instruments and establish a base laboratory in the Rocky Mountains. It'll give us time to search out some weakness in the Martians. Forlorn hope. There is a chance.
One day I was at the talent department with Charlotte Clary, and George Powell walked in with Byron Haskin and Gene Barry, and they were reading people for the part of Sylvia. And they weren't that impressed with me at all. But Charlotte Clary, she said, you can't leave. You've got to hear Anne. So I went in with the script, and my knees were shaking so hard I had to sit down, and I put the script, on a podium because I didn't dare touch it. I couldn't have read it. And I recreated the script in front of them. And George Powell, then and there, said, she doesn't look the part, but we'll make her look the part. And that, your mouth flies open. You mean I... And then Charlotte saying, yes, you've got it.
My second movie was War of the Worlds. I guess it was the biggest picture I ever did. I did dozens and dozens of movies thereafter, but War of the Worlds to this day is one of the great films of all time, I guess. Ann Robinson was my co-star, and we were both new,
He wanted everybody to be anonymous. He didn't want anyone to be recognizable. And trust me, after the movie was over with that awful, dreadful wig they put on me, I was never recognized. But that was his purpose. He wanted the Martian to be the star of the movie.
I remember as a little kid hoping for it every year, every day, and then it was happening. I couldn't believe it. Gene Barry on the set, shooting a scene with stars. Wow.
Want to know what I was thinking? If we could gather all the energy expended in just one square dance, we could send that meteor back to where it came from.
Well, our very first shot in the movie was a location shot. And we went to Phoenix, Arizona, because the National Guard was on bivouac, I believe is what you call it, and we needed tanks, and we needed action. And so we were flown there. It was raining, it was muddy, it was cold, it was miserable. And when those tanks ran, they didn't stop and start for us. Gene Barry and I had to run around and dodge all those things.
The effects had to be put in live. Falling beams, burning beams. We did some of the actual footage. We built these big containers that was at the top of the street and all worked on a button, and it opens up. So they can time it so that it comes right on the back of the double or the actor that's doing it. Burning embers, smoke coming, and wind. It's all done with a lot of help for some very good people working for doing the special effects.
Yeah, George Powell produced wonderfully strange, different kind of movies. Movies that had physical accomplishments in them that had to be done, and he did them. He made them happen. Magic. He brought a magic to the screen.
George knew what he wanted. He was on the set quite often, but he wasn't one to be always looking over somebody's shoulder. He let things flow. He let the director get out of the actors what he felt was right for the part.
Mr. Haskins would laugh and he'd say, "All right, Ann, which frightening look shall we have you do today?"
Everybody knew pretty well what Byron wanted. And if Byron didn't get what he wanted, we would do it over again, fill everything up, and start from scratch.
Haskin had a tremendous knowledge of special effects. He had a really marvelous collaboration with Powell. They apparently got along well, at least when they were working together.
Well, the locations were difficult only in the fact that you're in the middle of Los Angeles and you're showing an exodus of hundreds of people, packs on their back, cars overloaded. We worked on Sundays on most of the shots made down through the streets of Los Angeles because we had more control. The policemen had an easier chance of blocking the streets, and we wanted some of the shots to look desolate with nothing but some wind and a piece of paper going through. And that gave the picture the mood it was in. Also, at the back lot of Paramount, we had a good street, so that was one where we could really stage the fights of them being knocked through, men, windows going, at the height of the excitement.
It is some of the most gorgeous three-strip Technicolor you'll ever see. So saturated, so deep.
It will never fade. The colors are magnificent. A Technicolor camera is huge. It's the size of a person. And you have to cover it with heavy, heavy matting because you have 3 strips of film going through, and it's very noisy. Very, very noisy. I don't know why you can't, and maybe you can, or they were able to get rid of the sound, but why it wasn't recorded is beyond me.
Most of this picture was made in the back lot of Paramount and on stages 18. 18 was a double stage that could take the middle of it out and make a lot more room to work, and that's where the sets were built.
Al Nozaki was probably one of the finest art directors around. I mean, he was really a visionary guy, and he's the one that came up with the saucers, sort of the manta ray look and then the sort of cobra head thing, because they wanted to see about doing the tripod machines. George wanted to do that originally and do it in this puppetoon style, and Paramount said, "That's too much money. We can't do it. You've got to come up with something else."
This could cost 10 times as much. Imagine destruction all over the world. No could have done things like that.
And so Al came up with this, I think, brilliant designs. I mean, those saucers are beautiful. And being a manta ray, they're kind of scary right away. Cobra heads, cobras are scary. So it had all the elements, only it was a mechanical thing.
My daughter, she claims that she's the one that designed the Martian machine. 2 of them, but she's helped me in a lot of ways, so I guess that was one of them.
Now, what you're seeing here is the close-up of the Cobra eye of the Martian war machine. Now, this particular machine was not in the original film. They had 3 of them in the original film. They were made of copper and had all kinds of electronics in here, and the green things glowed, all the windows and stuff glowed. And this was made for the TV series that they did a few years ago. And so this is just made of fiberglass. And a sad story about the original ones that were made of copper, they gave them to a copper drive, a Boy Scout copper drive, and they were melted down. And so they don't exist.
I did get to go on stage 18 and watch them glide. It was silent. And these magnificent copper machines were just gliding above you, all across the soundstage. It was quite eerie and very, very impressive.
There were like 20 wires hanging from these things, some of them to make the electronics work in there, because in the saucers themselves, they had electronics with the things would glow green, the Cobra head that would actually pulsate, and they were made out of copper and had all the mechanism, and they were fairly heavy.
See, the wires were painted blue so that it would not show up blue screen, but some people have maintained they could see the wires pretty well.
When they fired the ray, they took an acetylene torch against black and with a fan, and they would match it up to where the ship was supposed to be or the Cobra head was supposed to be, and they would hit the acetylene with a fan and blow it out, and that's what you saw when that ray came out, which is really kind of brilliant. You think about it.
I remember coming on the set and looking up at this enormous Cobra head. And I said, "What in God's name is that?" And somebody flipped a switch, and that thing came on. Scared the devil out of me. I jumped a mile.
There's a scene later where they make these blisters, and they're like domes. And what they literally did there, they just took glass domes and shot them against black. and supered them right over the saucers. Because to make a dome big enough for a saucer that's, 3.5 feet across, that would have been a pretty darn big dome. Charlie Gomorrah, he was one of the all-time great makeup artist guys and also one of the best gorilla men in the business. He created, Al Nizaki designed this Martian guy. First glimpse you get of it is where they're looking through a hole in the wall and you see him go by, and it really looks, whoa, that's creepy.
When they brought the Martian on the set the very first time, he was enormous and far too big than whatever George Pal had anticipated, and they had to use it the next day. Well, Charles Gomorrah and his daughter, she was only 12 at the time, they went home and worked on that thing all night long.
Basically, we had to start from square one. And that meant that we had to build the armature, and we had to wire the head in, and we put chicken wire around the armature. We put plaster bandages over that, leaving the back open because Charlie knew that he had to work the monster now.
Charlie would kneel inside of it, and he could put his hands into the arms. They came about to the elbows of the Martian, and he had little pull rods that he could pull, and that made the fingers do this. And that's that one scene where you see a hand come in to grab Ann Robinson.
The monster's arms was made for an over 6-foot monster. So now we have to work these huge arms into this very small body. We pulled the old latex off the old monster and layer it on first, and then start putting new layers on over it, and this is beginning to really start looking opaque and real. And I'm going, this is real. This is really looking real. Even I'm thinking this is looking real.
And they wanted a 3-eye system in it, so it had a round eye, but it was red, green, and blues inside of this thing.
And he's realizing as he puts the eye in that now the wires can't go along the side. They have to go up and over the head for freedom of movement. So this is where the veins in the head were totally a last-minute idea. As it gets close to dawn, we're realizing it's the deadline. And this Martian has not cured and is falling apart right before our eyes. We're wondering if this is going to hold up through the shot. But what are you going to do? So it's just a little more wet, pat, smush, mush, and hope that it doesn't show. But if you look very carefully, you can see the tape unwinding on the arms of the Martian.
Diana, who was just a teenager at the time, was under the stage floor with little squeeze bottles making the veins pulsate inside the head.
Charlie is listening for cues on his own. He's trying to get the prop man to go this way, that way, faster, not so fast, stop, go, left, right, pump, 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 pump. All this is going on at the same time.
The prop guy had him on wires and pulled him, and darn near pulled Charlie and the whole thing over when it went out of the scene. I mean, it really goes out fast. He's going out waving the arms like crazy, and the back was open, and the guy pulled him so fast he darn near fell out of the thing.
You'll see that he's going like this. He almost fell over, and we knew if that Martian fell, it would be a disaster. It would have been just a blood blob on the floor. With tape and wood and chicken wire. It would have just splattered.
The best look you get of it is the arm at the end when it comes out and it dies.
Charlie Gomorrah was on the other end of the arm blowing into a tube. And so it was pulsating. And then as the Martian died, we changed the color from red to green, slowed down the heartbeat, sucked all the air out. And that's all we did. No computer had to do that.
And it was something you'd never seen before, ever. And then Charlie's great sculpting abilities to be able to pull this thing off and make it work is pretty unique.
It started a whole new genre of filmmaking that we're still profiting from today and that I'm able to tell you about 50 years later. And so the contributions that Charlie made ring out to this day. And even though nobody knew his name,
after the filming was all over with, I went back on to see the miniatures, which was absolutely breathtaking because they weren't little, they were large. The City Hall had to be, between 8, 10, 12 feet tall. Men were on ladders to get to the top of it to get the beacon, to work.
The miniature sets were very interesting in the work that went into them because they were exact duplicates in miniature of the buildings that we were trying to say was in the picture.
Well, I think the miniatures probably in War of the Worlds are some of the best I'd ever seen, especially at the time. I mean, they hold up today even, but the miniatures are great. They built, parts of Los Angeles, streets, whole streets of Los Angeles in miniature.
It looked like Gulliver's Travels, quite frankly. It looked like it just would have come to life any minute.
Shooting miniatures, you have to be able to close your lens down so you got a very small aperture, and that allows very sharp focus from the very foreground in front of the camera to the very back of the set. So you have to be able to close the lens down. That means you need a lot of light.
The thing that people don't remember nowadays were the tremendous arc lights they had. They had 2 filaments that would come together and they'd set them on fire inside, and they were carbon. They would burn outward. They were somewhere between 2,000 and 5,000, arc of power of heat. You couldn't stand anywhere near them. And this is one thing I'll never forget, when you'd always say cut, you'd hear somebody say, save the arcs.
And there it comes again.
George Powell and Pete Freeman have cameos in the film during the radio broadcast montage. They're 2 bums standing by a radio.
Suppose they are Martians, Professor. What would they look like? Bigger than us? Smaller?
There were only 2 scenes that I recall that were eliminated. One where I was lying in Gene Barry's arms, and there's something about his tie as I awaken that remind me of my Uncle Matthew. And then suddenly I start reminiscing about Uncle Matthew, but that was eliminated. I don't know why. Maybe it just wasn't necessary. The other one was when we're climbing out of the farmhouse, and he's shaking me. He says, "Don't worry, we're going to get out of this somehow." Well, the theater just fell on the floor laughing, so they cut that out. Those are the only 2 scenes that I recall that were eliminated from the film.
The end came swiftly. All over the world, their machines began to stop and fall. After all that men could do had failed, the Martians were destroyed and humanity was saved by the littlest things which God in his wisdom had put upon this earth.
George is considered the father of sci-fi films, and he pretty much is, because he was the first one to really do sci-fi films that got a name.
But it did prove to be the kind of supreme story of alien invasion in the cinema.
At the time, it was another job, another acting job, and until I got into it, I didn't realize how good it was and how important it was.
War of the Worlds, unfortunately, did not have a premiere. It should have. When you see this picture behind me, I took in Times Square on the day it opened over 50 years ago in New York City. You could see that the lines around the block are enormous. It was a Saturday, and I had nothing to do, and I asked the person at the box office or at the ticket taker, could I go see the movie, because Paramount said if I could go see it if I were alone. And they looked at me as if I'd lost my mind. And so I took out my driver's license and I said, "I'm Ann Robinson." And so they're looking at each other and said, "Well, we either have a total nutcase here, or she's really Ann Robinson." So they let me in.
It was a highly successful film for George, and Paramount. It was a very, very big picture.
War of the World pushed the envelope quite a bit.
I know what we did on our War of the Worlds and Worlds Collide. And I know that people were astonished at what we got at that time.
And it stuck in people's minds. It just didn't go away, and it hasn't gone away, and I don't think it will.
I think it'll become part of movie history as it is today. It'll be there all the time.